Welcome to Between Authors. I'm your host, author Adrian Lopez. What is it that excites us as a reader? It's finding that book or author that you may never have heard of, sort of like the treasure hunt for a reader. The goal for my podcast is to bring to you either those authors or those books that you may never have found, but may be the treasure you've been hunting for all along. Today in episode 54, I bring to you author Adam K. Watts. We're going to go over a little bit more about who he is, what he's published, what he's working on, and maybe his plans for the future. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you here today. Why don't you begin by giving an introduction to yourself to the viewers?
I've been called kind of a Renaissance man, but and I like that, so I remembered it. But I've done a lot of different things. I've had experience in a lot of different areas in life, and that's all contributed to my writing. But I grew up reading and loving books and loving literature. So whether I was out digging in somebody's yard or flipping burgers or working security or everything, those were always constant in my life. I first started trying to write when I was in kindergarten, still figuring out how to work the pencil and the paper, and try and figure that stuff out.
Yeah.
Around 2000, I finally got to write professionally, and I got a job as a technical writer, which was great because I was writing for a living, but it's not a lot of fun,
Yeah.
Not long ago, I guess it was in the end of 2020, I was looking at all these ads all over the place on Facebook about, we'll help you finish your book and get published, and just pay us this money and we'll do that. And I was looking at it, and then I kind of thought to myself, before I check out a bunch of money, why don't I just sit down and see if I can write a book?
Mm-hmm.
3 months later, the first book was finished. 3.5, 4 months later, I had the second one done. I was in the third one, and I got the first one published. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah,
a lot of fun.
It really is, right? And
Yeah.
It's interesting because, one of the things you mentioned about all the different things you've done in your life, right? And it really goes back to, I always like to talk about an author's voice. And I always like to say why technically there isn't really competition between authors, because every author's voice is different, right? And it's really made or created off of your experiences that you've had in life, off of your challenges, off of your likes, off of everything that influences you. So every author is always going to be unique, and that voice is always going to be unique. And that's the beauty of an indie author.
Well, we actually have slightly differing views on author voice. I noticed that when I was listening to some of your other interviews. For me, if I'm writing fantasy, the series I'm working on right now, it's written in first person,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll write chapters from one person's point of view, and then I'll write chapters from another one. The author voice changes. It's different based on the character.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got another, as soon as I'm finished with this series, I've got a science fiction detective noir story that I'm going to go to. And you better believe that voice is going to be nothing like you've seen in any of my fantasy work.
Yeah.
But voice is a tool in your author toolbox, and you can, and you change it, you use the right one for the project. Now, you still have your own outlook, right? You still have your own outlook, and you will speak that through your chosen voice. And so maybe the difference that, maybe it's semantics and you're talking about the outlook, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah. I see your point. Your point, I think, is a good one as well. But yeah, when I talk about voice, it's more the approach. It's more the approach and the overall how you're doing it, right? Because somebody that has had certain struggles or challenges in their life may come at something a lot more, I don't want to say emotional, but a lot more, umph behind some of that part of a story. Someone that has a lot more experience in, you know, the service, or a lot more or
Hmm.
experience in certain type of employment, you come from a different angle, even though other authors may be writing in the same genre, style, or first person, third person, or approach. But there's something behind each author that's different, that how you will approach it, and
We're
that's kind of more the angle I
Yeah,
take on that side of it.
yeah, we all have our own subjective experience or life experience
Yeah.
that the colors our philosophy and our views of the world,
Hmm.
um, and those it can inform us correctly or incorrectly. It doesn't,
Yeah.
and that's actually not the point on whether it's correct. It's
Yeah.
still authentic and it is still
Yeah.
real, regardless of that. Um, but uh, but yeah, definitely life experience it does play a key role in affecting that. But you also made me think of another tangentially related subject, which some authors don't like: research. Research.
Yeah.
There's an old expression, write what you know, that I think is often misunderstood because you don't have to have lived something yourself to be able to write about it, because you can research, you can find out, you can talk to people.
Hmm.
I Part of my story touched on slavery, human trafficking, and I had an interview with a trafficking survivor and got their viewpoint. I wanted to make sure that when I was representing the viewpoints and the feelings and how it affected people, that I was being as accurate as I could, not having lived it myself.
Yep.
So you don't knowing what's going on, knowing if but it could be something technical. If you write about how a guy goes up in a plane and it stalls, well, find out a little bit about how that works before you just
Exactly.
spit that out. So
Yep.
that it's a little, the knowledge is out there. You don't need to get a physics degree, but you can put a little research in.
Yep.
That's so find out, and then you can know enough to write what you then know. So
Yeah.
experience.
It's an excellent point, because a lot of times that's a question sometimes I'll ask the authors, because it's very important, right? Because I always look at research, and there's two levels. There's the rabbit hole research, where you just go deep, 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 and you just
I don't know what you mean. I have no idea
way
what you're talking
farther than
about.
you need to. And there's the research where you're saying, just find out how it works, right? Find out what's involved. But it is super important, because as we know with life, it's almost guaranteed that if you don't know what you're talking about, the readers that are reading your book will, and they'll catch it. They'll be like, "Wait a minute, this is not how that happens." And it's crazy, but it's almost guaranteed that you will have readers that know what you're talking about that you didn't quite know, and they will see it. And unfortunately, that'll take them out of the story, right? They lose that connection to the story, because they just for that point they're like, I can't do it anymore. I just don't want to even to read on, right?
I remember talking to one author, one aspiring author, about a story that they were doing, and they were talking about how, and it was going to be a fantasy, and they had this kingdom that so that nobody would know they had anything valuable. They had these mines that were underground, extensive mines that they would get all this material from, and then nobody would know about it. And I was just asking them, okay, well, how did they, when they dig all these holes, where's the dirt go? When they extract the ore, where do they process that? And how do you keep all that a secret? And they just wanted to, I don't need to research mining. Well, if mining's a big aspect of your story, maybe you
You
do.
kind of do.
You know, So, I mean, and there's the questions I was raising aren't unsolvable if you have the data.
Yeah. Yeah, it really goes into putting that effort into to making that connection, right? To making it right for the reader. And if you don't, it just you lose them, right? And that's the worst thing, is to lose the reader in the story. It doesn't matter how amazing your story is and how great the ending is. If you lose them for something simple that you could have researched 30 minutes, right? Just giving it the effort 30 minutes, and you lose them for that, it's a shame, right? Not to do that. I really like to reference it kind of like food, right? So somebody may not know how to make traditional Mexican food, traditional Indian food, but the certain flavors and spices that go there, and you toss them in there, and it gives you, right, that feel of, say, Indian or Mexican food. That's what that research is. Like you said, you may not have ever mined, but if you just understand or looked up how some of those things are done, they'll understand. It will be realistic to them because they go, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? And it's just putting in the effort, right? Putting in the effort to give that little extra for the reader.
Yeah. And I have some different perspective. When I think of research, I include, and I'm writing fantasy, I include world building under the category of research. Sure, I get to make it all up. No, I got to figure it all out. I have to figure out how everything works there. How does it, in Lord of the Rings, we watch the movie, and I love they're great movies, and we see, the going up at this beautiful city in the mountain on these peaks and everything, just beautiful. And I'm wondering, where did they get the grain for the bread? They got to grow that someplace. They got bread.
There's like no farms anywhere, right? There's no.
Beautiful city, gorgeous. I loved it, but not realistic.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Still fun, but that's the kind of questions that I ask myself.
Yeah.
In my writing, questions about grain. How does it get there? I asked myself that question in the first book of my series, Heir to Magic, and then thinking about that, I ended up having a random encounter with a trader, a goods trader. Book 2 of my series was called The Merchant Prince. That whole aspect of that entire bit of just a little bit of examination, a little bit of research, provided so much opportunity as far as plot and story direction. And in book 7, that is still a huge aspect of the story. A little bit of research.
Yeah, it's much more important than I think a lot of the younger writers realize. It's essential. It really is essential to your stories. And again, just make the effort. Make the effort to have that connection, because if you're asking the questions, the readers are asking the same questions, right? They're like, well, wait a minute. I understand in your world, everybody lives and walks on water, but how? How is everybody walking on water? Why is it just allowed? Why is everybody just walking around the water? So you can't just, you're making up the world, but you got to have reasons for certain things, because if you're asking it, they're going to ask it, right? So it's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I've always felt that it's very important to do that.
Yeah.
So besides experience, besides research, why don't you let us know some of the influences? What has influenced you creatively over the years? And it doesn't necessarily have to be authors and books.
Well, there's so many different things that have influenced me. But I always have to go back to one thing. When I was younger, my father was involved with the local stage, and Western Stage in Hartnell College in Salinas. He was involved in that, and probably illegally, he ended up with a reel-to-reel recording just audio of a performance of the play Man of La Mancha.
Mm-hmm.
So Don Quixote, right?
Yeah.
It's a musical version of that story. And I was about 12 or 13. I listened to that thing over and over and over so many times. And the whole idea, the theme about the impossible dream, and it doesn't matter whether you actually win or lose, as long as you continue on the quest, you try, you put in the effort, you do everything that you possibly can. Hopefully you'll have a victory, but if you don't, it's not for not trying.
Yep.
Right. And about living your dreams and going after your dreams and believing in them, no matter how ridiculous they may be, no matter how impractical. The song "To Each His Dulcinea," even if she's just flame and air, still to every man his dream. That was one of the biggest influences that I had. Countless other influences, inspiration everywhere I look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great point again, because I don't know if a lot of people realize, especially when they're younger, how much worse regret is than failing, right? You can fail, you can try again, or you can say, oh, I did my best, I couldn't do it, let me do something else. But that regret, right? You go back when it's a point where you can't do it, it's just the opportunity's not there. It's so much worse than failing, right? And that's, you never want to have that. You don't want to come to that point where you said, I just should have, when you could have done it and failed, right? Because failing is not the end all. You just pick yourself up and try again, right? And it's something, I don't know if a lot of people carry with them, and it's always something I fully like, you don't want that regret. You don't want to look back and say, I should have done this. I really should have done that.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the expression, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yep.
Right. And that's really what it comes down to. You have to go for it. You want to get there, you got to go for it.
Yep.
You can't see the show if you don't buy a ticket.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I really like that story. That's one of the things that really influenced you, because it can come from anywhere, right? And that's the beauty of it, is it could be something as simple as a sunset, and you're like, it just triggers something. It triggers something you think of. It could be something as simple as a photo or a piece of art triggers something, right? A song, which triggers something. So, like you said, there's inspiration everywhere, there's influences everywhere, and it's just, I always think it's just a beautiful thing.
I have to also, you made me think, I have to refer to an author that I would also say heavily influenced me, is Roger Zelazny. So he's widely known for his Amber series. Lord of Light was a very widely renowned book. He won multiple Hugo and Nebula awards. He was a just awesome writer. I had a phrase on the wall over my desk for years, to look at, to try to remember, to try to be half as good as he was. He was able to capture a lot of things peripherally. He tended to anthropomorphize or give motivation to inanimate objects that were just in the view of the character, right? The line I had, for example, on the wall, it said, "The moon pushed her ravaged face up over the windowsill to mock me. I couldn't reach the moon or even the window, so I looked away." I didn't even notice that line the first time I read the book. I just blew right on past it. And then I reading it again later, and I saw that, and it made me stop and look. Clearly, the moon isn't mocking him. The moon isn't doing this. This is all his perception and what he's feeling at the time, making him see that just in his objective environment. He sees that subjectively. And just capturing that like that. I thought it was brilliant. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that's a beautiful line.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it really is. That's one of the things I love about doing this, right? Doing these podcasts, doing these interviews, is in these conversations, finding out what influenced the authors, what made them want to write, what made them want to write this story.
Right.
Because the stories themselves are always just.
I'm sorry, Adrian. Can we have one of those pauses real quick?
Yeah, no worries.
And then we can edit out just a second.
Yeah.
I'm live right now on camera, recording, and I can hear him while he recites. Thank you. Sorry, I was getting a lot of noise in the background and I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's talk about your book, right? So I understand it's a series.
Right.
Why don't you kind of give us an idea maybe what the series is about? And again, I always want you to share only what you're comfortable sharing. Kind of give us maybe an idea how the story came about and kind of the projection or trajectory that you're going on the story.
Sure. So, well, first, I know some writers are heavy planners and they have to plan out every little detail before they can write it, and that kills me. I can't operate like that.
Neither can
I. I started out. I said, okay, you know what? I think I want to do like an urban fantasy, and I'm going to have a female main character, we'll figure something out. We'll bring some magic in, and that was kind of really all that I knew at that point. And then I decided, you know what? She needs a sister. I'm gonna give her a sister. And they're both fosters. They're foster kids, both of them. Mm-hmm. So they're not related by blood. But they're both foster kids. And then that new sister that I brought in, she was a 16-year-old. The older one was turning 18. Became more interesting to me, and I shifted focus, went back, changed the viewpoint to her, and I initially was writing it in third person, and at that point I changed it to first and went with her, and she became the main character. Yeah. And so this became portal fantasy. She ends up on another world, and we don't even see the older sister again for a few books because it was a splintered portal spell, and they end up going in different directions, and when we follow the first one. Her name is Mira, and she's a 16-year-old Latina girl, and she ends up in this world. And one of the first things that happens is she runs into goblins. And as I started to write this scene, I started to do the traditional, the stereotype. Goblins are bad guys. And I realized I was racial profiling. So I took a step back and I re-examined, right? So I said, okay, even if this group is bad, does that mean they all are? No, that doesn't make any sense. They're intelligent, sentient creatures. They can choose whether they're going to be good or bad. They can make their own life choices. Who am I to come in and say, you must be evil? So that changed the perspective and the underlying theme for the first three books right there. And we have, I do think that as authors, we do have a bit of a responsibility to bring things to light, to show things, maybe in a way that people can see them more easily than if it was the real world in front of them. And so that's kind of what I did. Nothing soapboxy, nothing over the top, but there's xenophobia and racism going on between all these different fantasy races. and how that works, and bringing that together and overcoming that, and having different characters realize their error in assuming about these other races. So that was very, very interesting to write. And like I said, that was a strong theme for the first 3 books of the series. But I mentioned about how the whole idea about trade and the merchants that was came out in the first book, and I bring in this a goblin trader that our character comes in contact with, and just because of their interaction, they kind of click, and then that builds a relationship that then becomes very important throughout the entire series. So, but I'm very much a discovery writer. A lot of times I don't know what's going to happen until it happens, or right before, I realize what's about to happen, and I'm not always happy about that. I remember it was a character that I introduced, and she just came into the scene and just took over the room, and she was awesome, incredible. And I got another page into it, and I realized, oh, she's about to die.
Yeah, I know.
And so she immediately became my favorite character, and then immediately died. I was not happy. But it's discovery all the way through. We find out what happens to Mira, and I also talk, and I do actually a lot. We talked about research. We talk about goblins, fae. A lot of that comes from Gaelic, Irish, Scottish mythology and lore, and I researched all that, and I'm finding, well, sometimes they have a name like sprite or goblin or pixie, and sometimes they just call them fae. Why? They don't have a better name for that. And fae and fairy are just variations of a human word that means spirit. And gosh, if these races existed, wouldn't they already have things to call themselves? Would they rely on humans for a name for their own race? I thought not.
Yeah.
So I used all that research, and gave everything its own twist. Flipped a lot of stereotypes on their heads. Just the foster aspect. It's most common, when you have a foster kid, that the foster parents are these, mean, cruel, bad people. And no, not this one. No, she's in a very loving, wonderful home environment, right? She wants to get back there. She wants to get back to her foster parents and her foster sister and all that. And that's driving her through the first 3 books to get back to these wonderful people, So if you like to see familiar things in an unfamiliar way, then this is a good story.
Yeah, I love that, right? That's one of the things I love, not only with books and writing, but just everything. I love when it comes from a different approach, right? When you're expecting something and that's not what you get, I love that. I think that's beautiful. And you made a good point. I can't plan either, right? I don't really outline when I write either. But and again, you do what you're comfortable with, right? If planning and outlining works for that author, then that's absolutely what they should stay with. But I feel that story sometimes, when you let it organically grow as you're doing it, and like you said, you completely change which sister it went with, because as you're writing it organically, you're like, this is the better right direction. This is the direction I need to go. Like you said, as you're writing that character, the one goblin character became more important, and that carried through. And that's the beauty of sometimes just letting it flow, right? When you're almost being the reader of the story, even though you're putting it down, but it's sometimes not you, right? It's like coming through you, and you're just reading along as it goes. And that's sometimes when it's the most beautiful work.
Well, I have a term that I came up with called method writing, and it's from method acting, right? Method acting, you kind of become the character. Well, I do method writing, so which is especially good in first person. I become the character, so I react as them, I speak as them, and then when the other character has to answer, I have to jump over and be that character. How would this character, if I am now with this idea and this thought and this background, how would I come out of it? And I think that it helps me to create more authentic dialogue, for one.
Yep.
And I have a lot of dialogue. A lot of things come out in dialogue. This isn't one of those stories where they run into trouble because somebody neglected to tell somebody something, right? You see that a lot, Meet me at the graveyard at midnight. I figured everything out. I'll tell you. And they die before they get there. And it's like, oh, I hate that, right? So, so feeling and getting, but there's a downside as well. I wrote a scene today, and there was a death, a painful death that just guts one of the other characters, just tears her up for this person to have died.
Yeah.
And that chapter was from her point of view. So I had to there at the keyboard, be this character, feel the horror and grief that is just overwhelming her. Even thinking about it now, I'm feeling it now, right?
Yeah.
It's powerful and can be hard and emotionally draining.
Yeah.
But like other experiences, sure, it's fictional, but I'm being the character and I'm feeling those feelings, and that can help to shape my experience and view in future writing as well.
Yeah.
So every time that I go through one of these experiences, and I feel the pain that character is feeling, it gives me something that I can then draw on again later.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very interesting you bring that up, because there's a couple of things that I've thought about in kind of that area, right? One of them is, when as a writer you're feeling that, right? And like you said, you feel it. You're like, it's still here. I haven't really gotten rid of it yet, and as I wrote it today. But when you're feeling that reader is going to feel that, right? That connection is going to be there. And that's the beauty of writing, is when that connection between the author and the reader is there. And that's there because you genuinely felt that emotion, right? Which is very different than someone who's just putting words on and not feeling it, right? And like you said, like a method actor, what's usually the con of being a method actor? Sometimes they have trouble coming out of it, right? They struggle after making a movie, and I need time. I can't get out of this character. I was in this character too long. Mm-hmm. But it's when they do that, again, the viewers of the movie go, that performance was amazing because of that, right? It's that connection to the thing. But the other good point is, again, when you let these things go, right? And like you said, you felt it, you let yourself feel it, and that carries on later because that was an actual experience for you, right? That wasn't just words, that was an experience. And one of the things I like to always talk about is how the story, right? The characters in the story mirror real life. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people, just like you mentioned, you talk about a character who wasn't meant to be big, got bigger, right? Or wasn't meant to be there that long, stayed the rest of the story. Mm-hmm. And I always like to do the correlation of, when you go through life, you meet somebody, you have a challenge, you have a traumatic event, you have experiences, and there's always that fork, right? Which way do you go from that? Do you grow? Do you stay in the same path and just repeat the problem, right? Do you go down the wrong side because it really pushed you almost in reverse? And that's how we go through life, right? You make decisions, conscious or not, that take you a certain way, right? And I've noticed when I talk about a lot of authors and their stories that that's what happens in the book. And when you let it organically grow, that's what happens because you're writing, right? You're thinking about it and you're like, oh, like you said, you love this character, and all of a sudden you're like, crap, she's gonna die very soon. And it's that experience that changed the other character, right? And when you felt that, it's just like life. That something traumatic changes their path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a slight change, or maybe it's a complete change, but every one of those things you're writing changes that path for the character. And that's why sometimes letting it organically grow is the right thing to do.
Well, it impacts the other characters. It changes their views. It changes their reactions. And now they're going to make different decisions than they would have made otherwise.
Yep.
And when I'm at the beginning of writing, there is no way I can predict that.
No.
And if I try and force the structure and keep those characters in, it doesn't feel as, I can't do that well and have it be natural. I'm not saying other writers can't, but for me, I can't do that. I can't do that.
You know, I've thought about this, and again, I'm not saying I'm correct, but I've thought about this because, again, I'm not one who can outline and structure it that way either. And I feel that maybe sometimes when writers talk about writer's block, it's because they've actually painted themselves in that corner, right? They have an outline or a structure they want to go through, and the story doesn't, right? The story is like, it's trying to lean this way and you're forcing it. And I think that sometimes that's when you're like, it's not coming because you're trying to make it do something it doesn't want to do. And again, do I know I'm right? Not really, but I have a feeling that may be sometimes when the writer's block hits you is because you're not letting it go. You're just not letting it go where it wants.
It's, I think there's some validity to that. I mean, they say that the most common reason for writer's block is when the writer, instead of wearing the writing hat, they try and edit. And then before they even get the words out, they reject them. And then they're still sitting there with a blank page, right? And I see that a lot. So I don't let myself do that. I write. Does that mean I don't get slows and slumps? No.
Yeah, still gonna come.
For the main thing that I run into that causes slows and slumps is when I'm coming onto something and I don't have enough information, setting, research. You know, I don't have the necessary information to understand the context of where it's going. And so it's like trying to push forward, and all of a sudden the whole thing gets very heavy. But then if I figure out what I'm missing, it's like, oh, then it all just goes.
Then it flows, right?
But if the point, to your point, writing themselves in a corner. I don't generally run into that because I'm not a planner, but I can see how that could happen. I mean, I have seen it happen. For a moment, we can talk about the horrible ending to the series Lost. He had saw these great ideas and wrote himself into a corner, and that was all he could do to get out of it.
Yeah.
None of it happened.
Yep.
I don't ever want to be in that position.
Yeah, and I don't think you probably will get there when you let it go, right? When you just let it flow, because like you said, and it goes back to the research, or goes back to your knowledge base, right? Again, as you've thought about this, and your excellent points with you ask yourself questions. Let me answer these questions because I want to know, because I'm confused. How are they doing this, right? So you
Mhm.
ask yourself questions, which is the best thing to do. You answer those questions to the perfect amount that you need to be able to work through it. And you've done that work. So it does flow for you, right? So you're not, like you said, sometimes you do because you didn't think of the question before and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know how to get out of this because I have no idea how this works. But yeah, I think sometimes when you sit there and you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. The characters are going to do this. This is what's going to happen, and ultimately, this is the output, right? This is the end. And forcing characters to do that when something's happened, and you're like, that's not how that character is going to react to that because something just happened, right? There was an experience, or they met somebody. If they're not the same person anymore, it's not that character is not the same
Yeah,
than as they
I,
started.
I'm hesitant um, because I know that there are authors who work that way. So I'm and if it works for them, great. So I'm hesitant to speak disparagingly or negatively about that approach. But I can say that for me, that my characters come out more three dimensional if I don't do that, if I
Yeah,
give them the freedom to respond as themselves,
yeah,
you know. Um, yeah,
yeah. And the beauty of being indie authors, right, is there is no right or wrong, right? Whether you're a full plotter, whether you're full just letting it organically grow, and mood writer, method writer, there is no right or wrong, right?
right.
Everything is valid because you do what works for you. You do what lets your voice come out, right? What your story wants to be, and that's the beauty of indie being an indie author, right? There is no technically there is no restriction, right? There is maybe language restrictions where you can't just write stuff
Right.
all
And,
over the place,
and
but
there are logic restrictions,
yeah,
you
but
know.
but really it's wide open, right? It really is wide open because you don't have to follow the templates. You don't have to follow the storylines from before where like this usually has to happen. Why? It doesn't have to, right? Take it that other direction. Like you said, flip it around and say, okay, it doesn't have to be like this all the time. It could be like this. And there's your story because that opens everything up for your storyline, right? And it's just beautiful and for the indie authors. And again, I'm not saying traditionally published is the wrong way either. There is no right or wrong way. Every one of them is valid. The
Well,
valid
I go through
ways.
a small publishing house, so I'm not technically indie, but I'm not through a big house either, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but you made me think of something. I was talking to a writer earlier today, um, and I did a little bit when I was a kid. I did a little bit of gaming, like the D&D type of gaming,
Hmm.
and I didn't do a lot. But one thing I did get out of it is the random encounter. Right,
Yeah,
you're taking a walk, you're hiking through the woods, hiking through the dungeon, whatever. Random encounter, you encounter blah. And one thing that I've done is at any time that the story felt like the next bit was clear, obvious, we knew what exactly was going to happen, everything, random encounter, story goes boing, different
yeah,
direction, right? And whatever everybody knew had to happen next never happened,
yeah.
right? Doesn't. It just doesn't work out that way. Because sometimes you make all the plans you want in life and it doesn't go, right?
It's yeah, no matter what you want, it's just not going to
Yeah.
follow sometimes.
What's the expression? Man makes plans and God laughs.
I think so. Which unfortunately is very, very true.
So I do that. I do that a lot. I do that a lot. Just like I'm trying to get this. I'm trying. How do I? Boom.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great technique because again, it's true. It goes back to meeting somebody, and that, like you said, that changes everything. right? Because that wasn't expected, that wasn't planned. So that's a great point. How many books do you plan on in this series, right? Do you have a number, or are you just going to kind of let it go?
Well, see,
as you go?
that's what I'm running into right now, is that this is the 7th book in this series. It is the final book in this series. So, and I've got like 5 or 6 chapters left. And I have to make sure that I tie up all the loose ends, right? All the different things that have been going on, they all need to come together. I can't leave anybody hanging, right?
Yeah.
Can't have the reader saying, "Yeah, but what about?" No. Let's get it all. So I'm actually having to put a lot more planning into these last few chapters than I'm used to doing, which makes it harder for me because I don't like to plan. But it's coming along. It's coming along. I just have to give within those plans. I just have to give myself still elbow room to maneuver and get around and bring these things together in the best way that they can.
Yeah. So say you finished, you absolutely finished at 7, right? And it's always hopefully, because sometimes, as you know, something could happen as you're writing the last couple. You're like, damn, that's the whole storyline I could go, right? So say the series is done, right? The series is complete. What do you plan for your future, right? Do you have, I usually like to ask, do you have a writing bucket list kind of thing? And that means, is there a genre you haven't done that you want to do? Is there a storyline you haven't done you want to attempt?
Well, I have I think I mentioned earlier, a science fiction noir detective story. And that's going to be what I'm going to put my attention on next. Okay. But I do have, I've got a long list of good story ideas are a dime a dozen, right? But it's taking the idea and making it into a good book, an actual good story rather than a good story idea. Yeah. That's the key thing. And I have prequels planned for the current series. There are spin-off options for the current series, but I'm not looking at those right now because I've got this other thing to work on first, right? So that's going to be my next thing, Max Carbian Mysteries.
Okay. So this is a question I like to ask when it's fantasy, when it's world building, right? And I always like to ask, because you have worlds that people use as the foundation, right? You have Star Wars, right? There's all these different stories that are sometimes not really related, but the world is there, right? That world has already been built. It's the foundation for the stories. You have the Marvel Universe, DC, all these different things, right? Do you plan on, at some point, like you have the prequels, right? But something maybe that's not part of the story, do you plan on using that world again, maybe in the future, because you have done that work and kind of built that world out?
So, short answer, yes. But the first book I ever wrote was The Flames of the Phoenix. And I started that book my freshman year of high school. I worked on that book for 25 years, rewrote it a gazillion times, finished it in the early 2000s, and then it sat. After I'd gotten the first 3 or 4 books of this series published, I went back, pulled it out, dusted it off, and it's out now. I went through it and updated it. There were no cell phones originally when I wrote it, so changed a few things like that just to bring it current, make it relevant, and then put it out. But for that world, I developed a language. And I use that language in my current series. I actually have it available on my website. If other authors want to use it, they can use it open source. Here are the language rules. Don't rename it for your race. Call it a trade tongue or a common tongue. If you add words, give us the new words so that we can all use them.
Yeah.
And work on that. I've got a font file created so that you can type it up in a guide on what's what. So that's kind of a foundation that I can use in all my stuff. I've got more books planned for that world that are not going to be related to that first book.
Yeah.
Okay, they'll on that world, yes, but separate standalone stories. And there are so many more options and opportunities for the worlds that I use in this series, because I have two other worlds. There's Earth and two other worlds in this series. If you study, the Fae legends, the Tuatha-De-Danann and the Sidhe, and the underworld and all that, and they just had a concept that there was only one other world, but I expanded it. There's actually multiple, and I got this stained, wrinkled map that I use to. This is one of the worlds. Okay, they're here now. They got to go there. How long is that going to take? How far is that? How long is that going to take? Okay, so I need to give them 3 weeks. Okay, doing all that stuff, but I recently came across something about Neanderthals, recent discoveries about Neanderthals, and how Neanderthals are probably the origin of our concept of the monster in the night and orcs, right? And now, the Ice Age and how they came down through and they just ate the other hominids, kind of a thing, right? And I started thinking about this icy tundra up here. Thinking, we don't really go up there. Maybe I'll have some Neanderthals or some offshoot going on up there. So there's so many different things, and we've already gone all over this world, different continents and archipelago. I've got an islander people, and they speak, the way that they talk is inspired by Hawaiian pidgin, and not a copy of, inspired by, similarities, yes, but and I borrow from a lot of cultures, but I try not to. I don't attempt to speak with authority on cultures that are not mine, right? But I allow myself to be influenced and inspired by them. Yep. And kind of like, and I even say that at the beginning of one of my books. This is my way of tipping my hat to those cultures, but I'm not trying to appropriate or represent them, right? Just showing, hey, this is cool, and I took some inspiration. Thank you, kind of a thing. So there are tons of opportunity for more stories on these worlds. Which ones are going to get written? We'll see.
Yeah, that's why I've always liked asking that question to anybody who's done fantasy, right? Because I was always like, you spend all this time building this, excuse me, wouldn't you use it on different aspects? Because you already have this world that's yours, right? Essentially, it's your world. And you can do anything in the world. It doesn't have to be the same storyline. Doesn't even have to be the same characters. Doesn't even have to be the same, like the races or whatever the people that you've already talked about. And that's the beauty of it, right? So I always like asking that question, like, you put all this effort into building this world. Wouldn't you want to use it kind of like a foundation for a lot of stories? Maybe not everything, but a lot of the stories that you do, right?
Yeah. But again, I find inspiration everywhere. So I can look at aspects of, I can look at this map and think about the different races and people. I've got some that are inspired by Native American cultures, others by European, like Spanish, Portuguese cultures, and just different things. So I can take ideas from here. I can just look and just see people around interacting, and get inspired by that and pull that in. There is no shortage of stories, because there's no shortage of people.
Yep. And it really goes back to your, the research that you talked about, because, it's when you start building that knowledge base, and, if you don't have to be an expert in any of it, but when you start building that knowledge base of, like you said, a little bit about these people, you just read something about the Neanderthal, you have all these little things that you can pull from. That gives you just so much to work with, right? Because you have all these little things, and it's not you're having to make you like, wait a minute, I remember hearing about this. I can use an aspect of that. Let me go look a little more into it, right? I can use, like you said, an aspect of this. And it's true. You have so many different peoples. You have so many different, throughout the time that are no longer here, right? You have so many things to pull from that it is endless. It really is endless. And once you've built your world, that's even multiplied, right? Because all of that now is in your world, and they all take a different direction.
Yeah, I from my years in technical writing, I know very well how useful it can be to reuse work you've already done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You've got a foundation, you've got a basis, great. Do something new with it, but still use, and you're already ahead of the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love it. I love. I'm one of those ones that watch everything in terms of documentaries, even if it's something I've never thought about or was interested in. I'll sit there and watch it, because I just love all those little nuggets of information, right? And I love having those little things to pull from, and just a little bit of everything, right? You may not know enough to answer stuff about it, but a little bit about everything, and it just gives you so much more ammunition, really, to use when you're doing these things.
Yeah. One thing I read there. So I've got a side job. I teach ballroom dancing, and I haven't brought dance into any of my stories. I mean, I brought music in, I brought music in, I brought cooking in, I brought booze in, and different drinks and different things. I've got like 30 cocktails that I have invented to go with different aspects of my story. Okay. But I haven't done anything with dancing yet.
Which is interesting, right? Because, was it King that said it? I think is you write about what you know, right? And he's like, you could be a plumber, which may not be interesting, but if you're a plumber on the space station, then it's interesting, right? Then you have all these other things you could talk about. And it is true. Again, it goes back to your experiences and things you love, things you do. You do bring them sometimes into your story, and it's interesting how you can weave them in sometimes, and you have, like you said, you have all these different people, all these different areas in your world, all these different storylines. I'm sure at one point it will come in, because it'll make the perfect sense, maybe for a scene or the characters that are in it.
Well, one thing that I did do in this series with my characters is, one of her personal eccentricities is she likes to watch old movies, and so she's a fan of Rita Hayworth.
Yeah.
Right. Who was a great dancer. Right. I mean, she was a flamenco dancer, and she's aware that Rita Hayworth was not a real name. And now I'm going blank. Carmen Margarita Cancino
Yeah.
is Rita Hayworth's real name. And maybe I'm mixing the sequence of the first two names up. And so at one point in the story, she has to come up with an alias on the spot, a different name, and she spits that out. It's Carmen Cancino, right? So I have a lot of fun when I can,
Yeah, I mean that's what makes it interesting, and it's always great when you throw those little, not necessarily Easter eggs, but all those little bits of information like that. I always love it. I always love it, and even if the readers may not catch it, it's just a lot of fun to put in as you're writing it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And if they do catch it, all the better.
Yeah, it's even better. I've absolutely loved this conversation, Adam. This has been great. I'm really happy
Likewise.
you came on and we can discuss everything. I love your outlook and how you approach writing and everything. It's again, I appreciate when somebody does make the effort to change things up, right, and come from a different angle. I do want to remind the viewers that I will leave all of Adam's links below. So his website, any socials he wants to do, and links to his book, everything will be down below. If you have any questions for either of us, please, leave them down. If you have questions about our books, if you have questions about writing, or just questions in general, we'd love to see those and answer them for you. And definitely, remember to subscribe and hit the notifications so you don't miss all these amazing authors coming up, because, the talent is definitely there. And the challenge for all of us is really getting eyes on our product, right? And getting new audiences to find us. And hopefully, that's what I can try to do sometimes. And even if I can find you 10 new people, word of mouth or whatever, build that up, for me, I consider that a win. So I really do appreciate you coming on today.
It's been a great conversation. Enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you again. And thank you, viewers, for watching. Goodbye.